The definition of what is underrated can easily be explained and thrown around in a variety of ways. One way could be that underrated means that someone or something is better or more important than most people believe. Another, rated or evaluated too low, underestimated or undervalued. Whichever way you look at it, it sends out the same message. Something may not be as appreciated or is seen as highly as it should be amongst a group of people. That can easily be made of as a topic when talking about footballers. Whichever generation you grew up in, there will always be a catalogue of players who a fan of football will deem underrated, which could be pointed to a footballer's ability, trophy cabinet, or even physical prowess. Take for example Dani Carvajal, where at this moment in time has played 286 professional Real Madrid games and scored 10 goals. However, as a defender, it is not goals and assists which separate Dani Carvajal and being underrated, but more so his work ethic and quality, both when his team are attacking and defending, that makes his efforts both greatly appreciated at Real Madrid, but also of fans who pose the argument of whether Carvajal should be tipped the best right back in the world if he played in the Premier League. Or what about Claudio Marchisio, who spent nearly his whole career at the Old Lady, who commanded the midfield when duty called, while others came and gone after the match-fixing scandal of 2006. To put it in a nutshell, Marchisio was always the bridesmaid and never the bride. Or even Robert Prosinecki, who is a German-born Yugoslavia representing midfielder from the late 80s. He was a key part of the Yugoslav youth teams and played a pivotal role for Red Star Belgrade when they became European champions in 1991. So many players throughout the years, more so of the modern era, go under the radar of being called great, if not one of the best in the world. There may be players who some perceive as good, while others deem great and potentially one of the best the sport has ever witnessed. What is great about this argument is everybody has a different opinion, which is to a great extent what it's all about. By sharing your opinion, you could arguably change people's minds, or at times, even your mind, when others share their list. So with that, let's talk about, in my opinion, 5 footballers who I believe are the most underrated in the sport. So, let's start with some disclaimers. Firstly, when I say the most underrated in the sport, I mean the most underrated in the sport that I know about. Because as much as I love to pop out a striker from 1910 to 1913 with 400 goals in 27 games, I don't think it's fair to bring that up when I know nothing about the footballer. That isn't to discredit any footballer who's ever played the sport, but I think I would be doing a great injustice to talk about somebody who I know nothing about at this moment in time, and brag about how great they are compared to footballers I know have played since the early 90s. If there are any footballers who are deemed underrated from the early 20th century, I would love to learn about them. Pelé played football when I wasn't even born. That isn't to say that if I was to create a best footballers ever, he would be excluded because of such. I know about Pelé and his world-class record of scoring goals and winning World Cups. That doesn't mean I know a guy called Martin Martinson who played for Chestnut Grove Club of Football, who played in 1895 and has an XG of 42 goals per game. Secondly, if you disagree with my opinions, that is absolutely great. This is what I mean about it being a fantastic sport of differing opinions. If you disagree and feel someone else should be in the list, put it in the comments. Just make sure you think before you type, so that what you convey is of high regard instead of a hot-headed cartoon character spouting nonsense after 7 Budweisers. Let's start with a controversial one, because I do love me some dislikes. Starting off with number 5, I feel the need to add this footballer, because it isn't the fact that I believe he's great and not good, or fantastic and not great. No. I believe there was a moment in time where he was literally on the same level as Ronaldo and Messi, and I honestly don't think he gets that credit he deserves for multiple reasons. Brace yourselves, and I will do my best to explain why this footballer is on my list. Gareth Bale began his career at Southampton from 2006, where he was at the time a left back. He then made the switch to Spurs in 2007 for £10 million, which includes add-ons. It took him 24 games to finally be on the winning team when he started, and it seemed as if he would not reach the heights we all know him for now. It was in a moment that his strengths were there for all to show, in that famous hat-trick at the San Siro in the 4-3 defeat to Inter Milan. To some, it wasn't the result that mattered, but in fact, the wheel that began to turn in Bale's career. Accolades were beginning to form a line for Gareth Bale, where he won a multitude of awards from varying organisations, from the BBC Wales Sports Personality of the Year to the PFA Players Player of the Year. During his latter stages in a Tottenham shirt, he played football as if it was genuinely easy, scoring from anywhere on the field, skipping past opponents as if they weren't there to begin with. Nothing, and literally nothing, stopped Bale. Aside from Phil Neville, but he was the anomaly. He earned the move to Real Madrid in 2013 for a reported £85.1 million. It was at Real Madrid that I believe he was able to create phenomenal moments which you want to watch time and time again. Who could forget when he made that insane run past Marc Bartra in the Copa del Rey final against Barcelona in 2014? Personally, for me, that goal is up there with Lionel Messi's run against Getafe in 2007. Both different goals, but how Gareth Bale made up even more ground after being shoved off the pitch, it was something I could not believe with my eyes. It is with these reasons, from his later career with Tottenham in his first run with them, and when he played for Real Madrid, that I firmly believe that he was, for a short space of time, the third best footballer in the world. Forget Neymar, Luis Suarez and Franck Ribéry. All of these can have claims to being one of, if not, the third best footballer at the time. But my hat goes to Gareth Bale, due to the simple fact that when you watch him play, he made the game of football look so easy. No tricks, no sleaze tactics, pure acceleration, pace and control of the ball. That is why it is so unfortunate that he had so many injuries and lost so much passion for the beautiful game, that his time at Real Madrid is perceived to be somewhat lackluster and of heavy criticism. Retiring at 33, Bale retired from professional football, and I believe it is a testament to his whole footballing career that those who shine brightest often burn fastest. Gareth Bale, I believe, because as much as we remember his 2 goals in the Champions League final against Liverpool and his run against Maicon during his time with Tottenham, his overall football career is only third to Cristiano Ronaldo and Messi in between 2010 and 2014. Some fans of football would give a valid argument about how a footballer should be judged solely on their goals. Especially for a defender, goals and assists don't mean much in their game, but is always an added bonus if they contribute to the scoreline. For strikers, nowadays at least, a striker is judged not only on goals, but also physical and mental attributes which managers could utilise amongst different passages of play. In the 80s and 90s though, if a striker scores a bag load of goals, they're deemed one of the best. Rudi Völler began his career at Kickers Offenbach, where he then began his ascent into goal-scoring greatness throughout his career. He moved to 1860 Munich, where he scored 49 goals in 2 seasons in 74 appearances. Then switching to Werder Bremen, which is on record what goal scoring is all about. In his first season, from 40 games, he scored 36. The next season, 21 in 44 games. After, 26 in 38 games. In 5 seasons for Werder, his lowest goal tally was 14. And for me, anything above 10 goals a season is somewhat great. Italy was his next destination in his career, where he continued scoring goals for Roma in the late 80s, later finishing his career with a couple seasons at Marseille and Leverkusen respectively. For 19 seasons, Rudi Völler scored 318 professional goals, and that is leaving out the best bit, as his amazing goal-scoring antics reflected on the international grounds. For West Germany, Völler averaged more than a goal every other game, as he shipped in 47 goals in 90 caps. He was victorious for West Germany in the 1990 World Cup, beating Argentina 1-0. Additionally, throughout his career, he won many accolades, from 3 European Championships with West Germany to being a Champions League winner with Marseille in the 1992-93 season. With all this in mind, with winning so many accolades and awards in his whole career, Rudi Völler is not a name you would instantly remember and blurt out when you talk about strikers in the 80s and 90s. In comparison, Jürgen Klinsmann, with his flair and finesse, is more so likely to be a name more football fans would be able to distinguish within a catalogue of goal scorers. Potentially, because Klinsmann had played in England in his career, Völler still had as much ferocity and vigour to not just look good with a ball in his feet, but to come off the pitch as a winner. Maybe in some cases, Völler is in the same boat as Claudio Marchisio, where he does his work off the focus of a camera lens, which you could argue helped all the more him and his players being so successful throughout the 80s and early 90s. Völler is perceived as underrated because as much as he scored when it definitely mattered, he didn't have the flash and flair which would set him out amongst the rest, which in the end of the day doesn't necessarily matter, as Völler, in my opinion, is one of the best strikers in the field of scoring goals before the turn of the millennium. For number 3, this was the main reason why this video had taken so long to make. There were so many players that I could have chosen to fill this position, as I firmly believe in myself that 5, 4, 2 and 1 are right. However, as a Brentford fan, but also someone with a likeness to Liverpool, it should break me to include a Manchester United player, but it doesn't sit right as well to not put one on this list, as there are just so many, more so in the Alex Ferguson era, that can plonk themselves nicely in the middle of the pack. One day I wanted to include Ronnie Johnson, who won 3 Premier League titles, an FA Cup and the famous 1998-99 Champions League final under Ferguson. Another day would be Nicky Butt, who I believe didn't play as much as he did, not because he did not have the skill and assets to start for a top team like Manchester United, but more so was just unfortunate that he had to play at the same time as Roy Keane, Paul Scholes, David Beckham and he who shall not be named. And another day would be Antonio Valencia, who I feel gets a cold shoulder of players who have served a single club for an incredibly long time and contributed a great deal to a club's success. And only when you mention them, the fondness over the player supersedes anything else. However, there was one player that I'd always felt could play alongside anybody and always secretly put in at least a 7 out of 10 in every game he plays. Darren Fletcher, a proper Scotsman, played for Manchester United for 13 solid years, coming through the youth system at the age of 11 under Alex Ferguson and left in 2015 under Louis van Gaal. At the time, he could have become the youngest player to ever appear in the first team of United in May 2000 when they played Aston Villa. However, young players on schoolboy contracts were prohibited to play at the senior level, so his debut was delayed. He would play for the reserve team for a few years as he did pick up a few injuries and was at first seen as someone who could play similarly to David Beckham on the right side of the pitch. However, it was at the centre of the park where he made his breakthrough. This breakthrough was in the 2003-04 season as he played in some pretty important matches, one of which was the FA Cup final against Millwall at the Millennium Stadium. Fletcher then began to make the position his own as best he could, and other teams noticed him when he wasn't in the squad. Jose Mourinho, then the Inter Milan manager, mentioned him in relation to his red card against Arsenal in the 2009 Champions League semi-final. Quote, "Fletcher is more important than people think. He eats opponents in defensive transition. I believe Xavi and Andres Iniesta are happy Fletcher is not playing. 6 more years passed with Fletcher in a Man United shirt, winning 5 Premier Leagues, an FA Cup, 4 Community Shields, a Champions League and a Club World Cup trophy. It was then, at 2015, that he moved to West Brom for free, being an experienced captain for the team. It was during this time at West Brom that he had achieved 300 appearances at the top level of English football. In 2017, he then moved to Stoke, where he then saw his first team opportunities begin to dwindle as he had gone through some various treatments for his health midway through his footballing career. As such, with all of this in mind, including his Scotland career, it was one thing to think whether Manchester United would be able to cope with Roy Keane and Paul Scholes retiring and leaving the club. But to have both Michael Carrick and Darren Fletcher stand in their stead, it was a no-brainer. And it is no wonder Man United still won many accolades with these two players at the centre of the park. Darren Fletcher, for me, is in the shadow of Michael Carrick, where Carrick was given less opportunities with the England squad and could be seen as another underrated player of the sport. However, I feel there is a great injustice for Darren Fletcher, as when I used to watch him play, he was more often than not aggressive to retrieve the ball from the opponents, hard-working all over the pitch, and was undoubtedly a huge asset to a team as a whole. Rather than those midfielders nowadays playing the safe ball by passing sideways every other pass. Who would have thought how far Darren Fletcher would have gone, were it not for his own personal health? But one thing is for sure, that he really does not get the credit he deserves as an outstanding midfielder of the game who could easily be a positive role model for young footballers entering the game and to play for any Premier League squad. This is by far the easiest inclusion in the whole list. We all remember that Aguero goal against QPR to win the 2011-12 Premier League. But lest we actually forget who scored the first goal to make that goal mean anything. Edin Dzeko is a Bosnian goal-scoring machine. Starting his career at FK Željeznica, he worked his way up to playing for some of Europe's biggest clubs, such as Wolfsburg, Man City and Inter Milan. Continuously flying under the radar of top goal scorers, he has won 10 trophies in his career, is the holder of the most caps for Bosnia and Herzegovina, and is still flying to this day in Turkey under Jose Mourinho Fenerbahce. As much as I don't play as a striker when I play football, Dzeko has been a striker who I not only enjoy watching, but also love to obtain in Football Manager as far back as 2010. Dzeko was always my go-to striker in the team I managed, and I don't see that far from the truth when it comes to clubs, past and present, wanting to acquire his services. From winning the Bundesliga with Wolfsburg in 2008-09 and 2 Italian Cups with Inter Milan, Dzeko for me is Mr. Reliable, not needing the camera always stuck on him to appreciate his hold-up play and finishing. It is with City that I will bluntly talk about how ridiculous of a striker he is. He was in the midst of fighting out the striker positions with Mario Balotelli, Sergio Aguero and Carlos Tevez, and still managed to get 50 goals and 11 assists in 130 appearances, both starting and from the bench. A great goals and assists total, but I feel he doesn't get the credit he deserves due to not being the main man. Easily said, if Dzeko did not score that first goal against QPR in the final match of the 2012 Premier League, we would not have gotten that iconic moment of Aguero scoring in the dying moments. Aguero is an icon, a legend. Some may say he slays. But where is the appreciation for Dzeko over a decade later? Edin Dzeko is a lethal striker, applying his trade wherever he goes, and I think it's both fantastic and a sentiment to his skill and prowess that he still makes the game of football look easy at the ripe old age of 39. When I was in Sweden a little over a month ago now, I came across a post on my social media about a player who was labelled one of the most underrated of our generation, and I initially didn't think much of it. I then looked into the post, where this player has won a multitude of accolades with the teams he had played for, and I thought to myself, how I actually haven't heard of him in a while. Why does this player not get the recognition he deserves after winning so much? A World Cup? Check. A Euro? Check. 3 Champions Leagues, 1 Europa League, 3 Super Cups, 5 La Ligas, 3 Spanish Cups, 5 Spanish Super Cups, 1 Premier League, 1 FA Cup, and 2 Club World Cups. All while being the same age as Messi. As I made this post, I pondered to see if I had felt anyone was as underrated as this player, which, spoiler alert, was the actual player which made me think of creating this video, and I didn't. So here you go, in my opinion, the most underrated football player in the sport, at the very most in the modern era. Pedro Eliezer Rodriguez Ledesma, or Pedro for short, is the last still active footballer from the famous Barcelona team in the top 5 European leagues. Pedro has dipped his hand into silverware wherever he goes, from Spain to England to Italy. For Barcelona, he contributed with 99 goals and 61 assists in 321 games. With Chelsea, 43 goals and 26 assists in 206 games. 30 goals and 16 assists in 166 games for Lazio, and 6 goals and 7 assists for Roma. With 318 goal contributions in his professional career, he has a goal contribution ratio of contributing a goal or assist every 2.3 games. That is insane, coming from a player which hardly anyone straightaway talks of in high regard. Whether it is the fact that the player is underrated or underappreciated, it is normally with these numbers that the player is sought after until their legs have dissolved from all the running. But it seems as though Pedro is still as hungry as ever, scoring 10 goals and assisting 4 times in this season alone. I believe Pedro is an unsung hero. Well, I remember his time at Chelsea where he may not have been the most star-spangled player you've ever seen, but in the end, he contributes when it really does matter, and has aged like fine wine at the age of 37. There has not been a case for Pedro that everybody universally believes he's underrated, which then he would be seen as overrated, and a cycle ensues of a chain of underrated and overrated debauchery. Thank you so much if you have made it this far into the video. If you have anybody else in mind who you believe is the most underrated, whether it is of the modern era or collectively within the sport, make sure to post it. And make sure you're subscribed. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe too. I can try and make some more opinionated videos for you to hate on, so you can forget about your life and make my life more miserable when I see them. Lots of love.